Fantastic day, everyone. I'm Cesar Martin, and let's talk about Republic Act number 11313 or the Safe Spaces Act, Bawal Bastos Law, which covers all forms of gender-based sexual harassment or GBSH committed in public spaces, educational or training institutions, workplace, and online space. Gender-based streets and public spaces sexual harassment. GBSH in street and public spaces is defined as acts which are committed through any unwanted and uninvited sexual actions or remarks against any person regardless of the motive for committing such action or remarks. So, what do public spaces refer to under this law? We have the streets and alleys, roads and sidewalks, buildings, restaurants and cafe, public parks, schools and churches, government offices, malls and public markets, transportation, terminals and common carriers, spaces used as evacuation centers, public utility vehicles, public washrooms, private vehicles covered by app-based transport network services, recreational spaces such as but not limited to cinema halls, theaters and spas, bars and clubs, resorts and water parks, hotels and casinos, internet shops, all other areas regardless of ownership, openly accessible or offered to be accessed or accessed by the public. So what are these acts of gender-based sexual harassment in public spaces? A. Catcalling or unwanted remarks directed towards a person, commonly done in the form of wolf whistling or paninipol, misogynistic, transphobic, homophobic, and sexist slurs, as well as unwanted invitations. Sexist remarks are slur statements that are indicative of prejudice, stereotyping, or discrimination on the basis of sex, typically against women. Homophobic remarks are indicative of fear, hatred, or aversion towards persons who are perceived to be or actually identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, pansexual, and such other persons of diverse sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or towards any person perceived to or actually have experienced same-sex attraction. Misogynistic remarks or slur statements that are indicative of the feeling of hating women or the belief that men are inherently better than women. Transphobic remarks are slur statements that are indicative of fear, hatred, of aversion towards persons whose gender identity and/or expression do not conform with their sex assigned at birth. We also have persistent uninvited comments or gestures on a person's appearance and relentless requests for personal details, statement of sexual comments and suggestions, public masturbation or flashing of private parts, groping, making offensive body gestures at someone, and other similar lewd sexual actions. Any advances, whether verbal or physical, that is unwanted and has threatened one's sense of personal space and physical safety. This may include cursing, leering and intrusive gazing and taunting, persistent telling of sexual jokes, use of sexual names, and stalking or conduct directed at a person involving the repeated visual or physical proximity, non-consensual communication or a combination thereof that cause or will likely cause a person to fear for one's own safety or the safety of others or to suffer emotional distress. So, what are the penalties for GBSH in public spaces? Penalties vary according to the act of GBSH committed and how often a person was convicted for violating the laws. For the verbal GPSH, first offense, 12 hours community service inclusive of gender sensitivity training and 1,000 pesos fine. Second offense, imprisonment of 6 to 10 days or 3,000 pesos fine. Third offense, imprisonment of 11 to 30 days and 10,000 pesos fine. Demonstrated GBSH. First offense, 12 hours community service inclusive of GST and 10,000 pesos fine. Second offense, imprisonment of 11 to 30 days or 15,000 pesos fine. Third offense, imprisonment of 1 month and 1 day to 9 months and 20,000 pesos fine. For the GBSH, through stalking and physical advances such as touching, pinching, or brushing against the genitalia, groin, or breasts. First offense, imprisonment of 11 to 30 days or a fine of 30,000 pesos, provided that it includes attendance in a GST to be conducted by PNP in coordination with LGU and PCW. Second offense, imprisonment of 1 month and 1 day to 6 months or 50,000 pesos fine. Third offense, imprisonment of 4 months and 1 day to 6 months or 100,000 pesos fine. For the additional penalties, if the perpetrator is a driver or operator of a PUV, cancellation of license of the driver by the LTO, suspension or revocation of franchise by the LTFRB. This sanction may be imposed upon or order by the proper court or upon order of LTO or LTFRB in an administrative proceeding. So, what are the roles of local government units in implementing anti-GBSH in streets and public spaces? To pass an ordinance to localize the law within 60 days from its effectivity, to disseminate or post in conspicuous places a copy of the law and the corresponding ordinance. The LGUs may come up with information, education, and communication materials which may be in their respective languages to provide measures to prevent GBSH in educational institutions, such as information campaigns and anti-sexual harassment seminars. To discourage GBSH and impose fines on acts of gender-based sexual harassment as defined in the law, to establish an anti-sexual harassment hotline where personnel assigned to attend the hotline knowledgeable on GBSH and the forms of assistance made available by the LGU, and to coordinate with the DILG in implementing the law. This is also to establish a referral system for complainants of GBSH in streets and public spaces. This may form part of an existing referral system for complainants of other forms of gender-based violence, and to provide training on the law for the punong barangay and members of the Lupong Tagapamayapa in cases covered by the Katarungang Pambarangay system for traffic enforcers under their jurisdiction, and adopt training modules for concerned LGU personnel down to the barangay level. To set up anti-sexual harassment desks in all barangay, city, and municipal halls, preferably staffed by a woman. VOW desks may also serve as the ASH desks, and the same shall be strengthened following the guidelines to be set by the DILG. To create a mechanism for handling and documentation of complaints, including those in cases covered by the first and second offenders of verbal GBSH. Let's get going. Where to seek assistance? Local government unit via local anti-sexual harassment hotline, nearest police precinct through their women and children's protection desks, local social welfare and development office, public attorney's office subject to persons qualified for legal assistance procedure, local traffic enforcer, LTO, LTFRB, ASH desk officers of the LGU, and ASH officer designated by operators of establishment. We also have this gender-based online sexual harassment like threats physical, psychological, and emotional unwanted sexual, misogynistic, transphobic, homophobic, and sexist remarks and comments online, whether publicly or through direct and private messages. The invasion of the victim's privacy through cyberstalking and incessant messaging, uploading and sharing without the consent of the victim any form of media that contains photos, voice, or video with sexual content, or any unauthorized recording and sharing of any of the victim's photos, videos, or any information online, impersonating identities of victims online or posting lies about victims to harm their reputation, filing false abuse reports to online platforms to silence victims. So what is cyberstalking? Cyberstalking is a form by stalking that is committed through an electronic medium in which online communication takes place. To constitute an offense, the conduct must be manifested through the use of electronic communications in stalking. Stalking an online profile which is publicly accessible in itself does not constitute an offense. So, where can a victim of online gender-based sexual harassment file a complaint? The victim can file a complaint directly with the National Bureau of Investigation through its Cybercrime Division, the Philippine National Police Anti-Cybercrime Group, or the Office of the Cybercrime of the Department of Justice. Let's have the practical tips in saving digital evidence and online report. Take note of the uniform resource locator or the web address of the website or social media account of the perpetrator. You can make a printout of the content being complained of by opening a browser on a laptop or desktop, going to the pertinent account or page and print the said web page. Or you contact authorities via PNP's Anti-Cybercrime Group e-complaint desk. Let's have now the gender-based sexual harassment in workplaces. It is an act or series of acts involving any unwelcome sexual advances, requests, or demand for sexual favors, or any act of sexual nature, whether done verbally, physically, or through the use of technology such as text messaging or electronic mail, or through any other forms of information and communication systems that has or could have a detrimental effect on the conditions of an individual's employment or education, job performance, or opportunities. Two, a conduct of sexual nature and other conduct based on sex affecting the dignity of a person which is unwelcome, unreasonable, and offensive to the recipient, whether done verbally, physically, or through the use of technology such as text messaging or electronic mail, or through any other forms of information and communication systems. Third, a conduct that is unwelcome and pervasive and creates an intimidating, hostile, or humiliating environment for the recipient. Is sexual harassment between peers or by a subordinate to a superior now covered under this law? Yes, the first law to penalize sexual harassment, Anti-Sexual Harassment Act of 1995, recognized that sexual harassment occurs in work, education, and training environments. However, it requires the existence of authority, influence, or moral ascendancy between the offender and the offended party. It did not specifically address the issue of a hostile environment resulting from the sexual harassment between peers or co-employees or those committed against a superior. What can a victim of workplace GBSH do? The victim can file an administrative complaint with the Committee on Decorum and Investigation and/or file a civil or criminal case before the courts. So here are the responsibilities of employers under the Safe Spaces Act: to disseminate or post in a conspicuous place a copy of the law to all persons in the workplace, to provide measures to prevent GBSH in the workplace, such as the conduct of anti-sexual harassment seminars, to create an independent internal mechanism or a committee on decorum and investigation, to investigate and address complaints of gender-based sexual harassment, to develop and disseminate in consultation with all persons in the workplace or a code of conduct or workplace policy which shall expressly reiterate the prohibition on gender-based sexual harassment, describe the procedures of the internal mechanism, and to set administrative penalties. The committee on decorum and investigation to be established by the employer should adequately represent the management, the employees from the supervisory rank, the rank and file employees, and the union or employees association, if any. Designate a woman as its head, and not less than half of its members should be women. Be composed of members who should be impartial and not connected or related to the alleged perpetrator. Investigate and decide on the complaints with 10 days or less upon receipt thereof. Observe due process. Protect the complainant from retaliation without causing her or him any disadvantage, diminution of benefits, or displacement without compromising his or security of tenure, and guarantee gender sensitive handling of cases and confidentiality to the greatest extent possible. So here are the penalties for the employers. Failure to implement their duties under the law, fine of not less than 5,000 pesos but not more than 10,000 pesos. Not action or non-action on reported acts of GBSH in their workplace, fine of not less than 10,000 pesos but not more than 15,000 pesos. Let's also have the gender-based sexual harassment in educational and training institutions. What are the duties of heads of educational and training institutions under the Safe Spaces Act? The same requirements and corresponding penalties imposable upon employers are also applicable to heads of educational and training institutions. So these heads are also required to disseminate the law, develop their own code of conduct, and establish and or update the composition of the Commission on Decorum and Investigation. Note that these heads have to harmonize the code for their employees and for their students. In addition to such duties, it also requires them to designate an officer in charge to receive complaints regarding violations of the law and forward them to the CODI, impose administrative disciplinary measures for students who commit acts of GBSH against their fellow students or teachers. If a school knows or reasonably should know about acts of gender-based sexual harassment or sexual violence being committed that creates a hostile environment, the school must take immediate action to eliminate the same acts, prevent their recurrence, and address their effects. And of course, to educate students from the elementary to tertiary level about the provisions of the law and how they can report cases of gender-based streets, public spaces, and online sexual harassment committed against them. School heads and heads of training institutions covered by the CHED, DepEd, and TESTA shall comply with the standards set by the said agencies. The Committee on Decorum and Investigation to be established by the education and training institution should be composed of representatives from the school administration, the trainers, instructors, professors or coaches, and students or trainees, students and parents as the case may be. To designate a woman as its head, and not less than half of its members should be women. Be composed of members who should be impartial and not connected or related to the alleged perpetrator. Investigate and decide on the complaints within 10 days or less upon receipt thereof. Observe due process. Protect the complainant from retaliation without causing her or him any disadvantage, diminution of benefits, or displacement, and without compromising his or her security of tenure, and guarantee gender sensitive handling of cases and confidentiality to the greatest extent possible. So minor students who are found to commit GBSH shall be held liable for administrative sanctions by the school as provided in their student handbook. School or institution heads who did not implement their duties under the law, fine ranging from 5,000 pesos to 10,000 pesos, and school heads who did not act on reported GBSH in their institution, fine ranging from 10,000 pesos to 15,000 pesos. Thank you very much for listening. God bless.